The nurse stopped mid-sentence. Not slowly, not politely. She stopped the way people do when a screen shows something they weren't expecting. Her fingers hovered above the tablet. The monitor beside my bed went quiet, like it had frozen between instructions. For a second, no one spoke. Then she looked at the chart again, and then at me. "I need to verify this," she said, her voice suddenly careful. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew this pause wasn't normal. The room hadn't changed, but the air had. The IV pump continued its steady rhythm. The hallway outside stayed busy, yet something important had just stalled, and everyone in the room felt it. My sister stepped forward before the nurse could say anything else. "She's not handling her care right now," she said calmly. "I am." The nurse nodded without questioning it. That part didn't surprise me. It never did. They turned their bodies toward her. Not fully, just enough. The tablet angled away from my line of sight. The conversation continued, as if I were a chart note instead of the patient lying there. "We'll proceed once this is confirmed," the nurse said, tapping the screen again. My sister exhaled, confident, almost bored. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Just a routine check," the nurse replied. Routine. That word gets used when no one wants to explain something yet. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't understand what was happening, but because I did. The nurse stepped slightly to the side, lowering her voice as she spoke to my sister. They discussed medication timing, consent notes, and updated instructions. Every sentence was directed away from me. No one asked how I felt. No one asked what I wanted. I was present, but not included. Another nurse entered, glanced at the screen, then paused just long enough to notice the same thing. Her eyes flicked to the wristband on my arm, then to the name on the chart. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. My sister caught the hesitation. "She's been under a lot of stress," she said smoothly. "It's better if I handle communication." The nurse nodded again, too quickly this time. I watched the way the cursor on the tablet blinked but didn't move. I noticed the slight delay before the next instruction appeared. Tiny things, the kind most people miss. But when systems hesitate, it's rarely accidental. They asked my sister to step closer to the station desk. The curtain around my bed remained half open, enough for people walking by to see me, but not enough for me to see what they were reviewing. That was intentional. The nurse lowered her voice further. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Verification. A few moments later, the nurse returned to my bedside. Her expression was neutral, professional, but tighter than before. "Before we continue," she said, "I need to ask a few questions." She looked at my sister first. "Are you listed as the medical proxy?" "Yes," my sister answered immediately. The nurse nodded, then glanced back at the screen. "And the authorization was completed when?" My sister didn't hesitate. "Earlier this year." The nurse paused. Not long, just long enough. I felt my sister's confidence flicker, just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. The nurse turned toward me for the first time since she'd entered the room. "Can you confirm your full name?" she asked. I did. She checked the wristband again, then the chart. "Thank you," she said, and stepped back. The room fell quiet once more. This time, the silence wasn't procedural. It was cautious. Another staff member approached the desk, whispered something to the nurse, then left without a reply. The nurse didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, reviewing the screen again, slower now. My sister crossed her arms. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone firmer this time. "We just need to review something in the file," the nurse said carefully. Review. Not correct, not update. Review. I noticed how she avoided using my sister's name, how she avoided eye contact altogether. The tablet was turned flat against her chest now. "We'll be back shortly." And then she left the room. My sister looked at me for the first time since the pause had started. Her expression was composed, but tight around the mouth. "There's nothing to worry about," she said. "These things happen." I didn't respond. I watched the doorway instead, because whatever the nurse had seen, it wasn't nothing. The sounds of the hallway felt louder now. Footsteps, voices, the soft squeak of a rolling cart stopping nearby. Someone was reading my file, not skimming it, reading it. The curtain shifted as another nurse passed, glanced inside, then slowed. Her eyes lingered on the chart at the foot of my bed. She frowned. That's when I knew this wasn't going to move forward the way my sister expected. A few minutes later, the first nurse returned, this time with someone else. They stood just outside the room, speaking quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the posture. This wasn't routine anymore. My sister straightened. "What's going on?" she asked. The nurse didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the chart one more time, then at me. Her expression was calm when she finally spoke. "This file needs to be reviewed before any further decisions are made." That was all she said. No accusation, no explanation, no apology, just a statement. And in that moment, I understood something my sister didn't. The system hadn't turned against her. It had simply stopped following her. After the pause, nothing visibly changed. That was the unsettling part. The nurse didn't leave the room. She didn't explain anything either. She adjusted her grip on the tablet, nodded once, and said she needed to confirm a few things. Her voice stayed professional, almost gentle. Then she stepped out through the curtain without meeting my eyes. The room resumed its normal rhythm too quickly. Machines hummed again, footsteps passed in the hallway, a cart rolled by, metal wheels tapping softly against the floor. Whatever had frozen moments earlier now moved forward, just more carefully. My sister didn't hesitate. She stepped closer to the bed and spoke in the same confident tone she'd been using all morning. She answered questions before they were finished. She clarified instructions no one had asked her to clarify. When staff returned, their eyes naturally shifted toward her, as if the decision had already been made about who mattered in the room. "She gets overwhelmed easily," she said once, casually. Another time, "I handle her medical decisions." Later, "Just let me know what needs approval." No one challenged it. I noticed how the nurse adjusted her position when she came back in. She stood closer to my sister this time, angling the tablet so only one of us could see it. The questions that followed weren't directed at me. They hovered just above my head, then landed neatly with the person standing beside the bed. I stayed quiet, not because I agreed, not because I was confused, but because I was watching. A new form appeared on the tray table. It wasn't placed in front of me. It was set slightly to the side, closer to where my sister stood. The nurse explained it quickly, using phrases like standard authorization and temporary proxy. The language was clean, efficient, stripped of emotion. I listened carefully. Words like consent, best interest, medical judgment. Nothing sounded aggressive. Nothing sounded wrong. That's what made it dangerous. The system didn't feel hostile. It felt smooth, automatic, as if it had been designed to trust whoever spoke first, whoever sounded calm enough to belong. When the nurse asked if everything was clear, my sister answered before I could inhale. "Yes," she said, "that's fine." The nurse nodded and moved on. No one asked me. Later, another staff member came in to review medications. She read from the chart without looking up, confirming dosages and timing. Each confirmation was followed by a glance toward my sister, who approved with short nods, as if she were validating something she'd already decided. I tracked every detail: where the chart was placed, which hand held the pen, who initialed and who didn't. When a wristband check happened, it was quick, almost rushed. The nurse scanned it, paused for half a second, then continued. Her face didn't change, but her posture did. She straightened slightly, like someone adjusting after noticing something they hadn't expected. Still, she said nothing. The pressure wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. It came in layers. Visitor instructions were mentioned next. There were guidelines and limitations, explained neutrally. My sister acknowledged them as if they were already agreed upon. She asked practical questions about timing and access, and the staff responded to her with efficiency and respect. I wasn't excluded outright. I was simply unnecessary. When the nurse asked how I was feeling, the question felt symbolic. The answer didn't matter. Before I could respond, my sister smiled and said I'd been tired and disoriented earlier, that stress made it hard for me to focus on decisions. The nurse accepted this explanation without hesitation. I studied the chart again when it came back to the room. The pages were thicker now, more tabs, more layers of authority embedded into paper. Somewhere between the first pause and now, my role had been quietly reduced. Patient, subject, not decision maker. The language used around me softened. You don't need to worry about that. We'll take care of it. She'll explain everything later. It sounded kind. It wasn't. Gaslighting doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it whispers reassurances until resistance feels inappropriate. I said nothing. I watched as a form was flipped and placed on top of another. I noticed that the signature line wasn't where it usually appeared. The date field was already filled in, even though the time didn't match the clock on the wall. Small things, but systems are built on small things. At one point, a nurse mentioned a proxy arrangement. The term passed quickly, almost buried in a longer sentence. My sister nodded like it was old news. The nurse didn't elaborate. I mentally noted the phrasing: temporary, pending, subject to verification. Those words mattered. The hallway outside grew busier as shift changes approached. New voices, new footsteps. A different nurse entered and paused slightly longer when she saw the chart. She checked the wristband again, more deliberately this time, then glanced at the paperwork before speaking. Her tone stayed neutral, but her pace slowed. She asked my sister to repeat her name. Then she asked mine. That was new. My sister answered smoothly. I didn't interrupt. The nurse typed something, stopped, deleted it, then re-entered the information. Her eyes flicked once toward the doorway, then back to the screen. Nothing dramatic happened, but the room felt different. When she placed the chart back down, it wasn't where it had been before. It sat closer to the edge of the bed now, within my line of sight. Not offered, just visible. I could see the authorization section clearly. One line stood out. The acknowledgment box wasn't marked. The date was correct, the name was correct, but the sequence was wrong. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. I didn't react. I didn't ask a question. I let the system keep moving, confident in its own assumptions. Because by then, I understood something important. The pressure wasn't meant to break me, it was meant to erase me quietly, and the only way to survive that kind of erasure was to document it, silently, completely, without interference. As the nurse left the room again, she paused just outside the curtain. I heard her lower her voice while speaking to someone else. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. Careful, measured. The kind of tone people use when they've noticed a problem but aren't ready to name it yet. I lay back against the pillow, eyes open, breathing steady. The control around me was tightening. The system was closing ranks. But somewhere in the paperwork, something hadn't aligned, and I knew it. Nothing changed on the surface. The routine continued exactly the same. Medications arrived on schedule, vitals were checked at the same intervals, staff entered and exited with practiced efficiency. My sister remained comfortable in her role, speaking on my behalf with the same confidence she had shown from the start. But beneath that routine, I stopped experiencing the hospital as a patient. I started experiencing it as a system. I noticed how every decision moved through layers: nurses, shift leads, electronic approvals. None of them emotional, none of them personal. Just process, just documentation, just rules being followed because someone had indicated authority. And I began paying attention to where that authority actually came from. I didn't ask questions loudly. I didn't challenge anyone. I didn't say a word about control or consent. I stayed calm, cooperative, and still. That silence became my shield. It allowed people to move naturally around me without adjusting their behavior or tightening their grip. During one medication check, I watched how the nurse scanned my wristband before looking at the chart. Her eyes lingered there longer than necessary. Not suspicion, verification. She adjusted the chart slightly, then proceeded without comment. I stored that moment away. Later that day, another nurse entered during a shift change. She introduced herself briefly, then glanced at the bedside folder. I noticed how she flipped one page back, then forward again, as if confirming sequence rather than content. No reaction, no expression, just a pause. I began tracking those pauses. I paid attention to how often my name was verbally confirmed compared to how often my sister's authority was assumed. I watched when staff spoke to me directly and when they redirected to her. The pattern was consistent, but not absolute. Certain steps required a check that couldn't be skipped. Consent confirmations, identity verification, proxy authority acknowledgement. Those moments were quiet, almost invisible, but they mattered. When I requested a copy of my discharge summary, I did it casually, as if it were a routine curiosity. No urgency, no insistence. The nurse nodded and said it could be arranged. She didn't ask my sister for permission. That stood out. The document arrived later, placed on the bedside table, closer to me than to anyone else. I didn't read it immediately. I waited until the room was empty, until the natural rhythm returned. I wasn't looking for mistakes. I was looking for structure. Dates, signatures, order of entries, who authorized what and when, which decisions were noted as patient-initiated, and which were processed through proxy channels. The more I observed, the clearer it became that the system itself was neutral. It didn't favor control, it favored clarity, and clarity depended entirely on documentation. That night, I mentally reviewed everything I had seen so far, not emotionally, procedurally. The initial pause, the verification line, the incomplete form, the mismatch between timing and acknowledgement. None of it was dramatic, but taken together, it formed something solid. The next morning, during rounds, I watched my sister answer questions with ease. She spoke confidently, casually. She didn't hesitate because she had never been challenged. To her, the process was already won. That confidence worked in my favor because people who believe they have absolute control rarely check their footing. I noticed that staff no longer avoided looking at me. Some still deferred to her, but others began including me in small ways, confirming comfort, explaining procedures briefly, checking positioning. Nothing confrontational, just compliance with baseline protocol. That told me something important. The system still recognized me. Later that afternoon, I asked a neutral question, not about authority, not about control, just about process. I asked how medical decisions were documented when a patient was conscious but had a designated proxy. The nurse answered factually, calmly, no suspicion. She explained the conditions under which proxy authority applied and when direct patient acknowledgement was still required. She didn't know she was answering the most important question of the day, because her explanation matched exactly what I had already observed. There was a narrow gap, small, procedural, easy to miss, but it existed. I didn't act on it. I didn't even acknowledge it outwardly. I thanked her and let the process continue, because by then the preparation was already complete and the record was doing the work for me. The change didn't arrive loudly. It came as a delay. A medication order that usually took minutes stayed pending. The monitor beside my bed kept running, but no one adjusted the settings. A nurse entered, checked the chart, and left without saying anything. That had never happened before. An hour later, a different nurse came in. She didn't speak to my sister first this time. She stood closer to my bed, asked how I was feeling, and waited for my answer instead of redirecting the question. I answered simply, calmly. She nodded, made a note, and stepped out again. From the corner of my eye, I could see my sister watching the door longer than usual. By mid-afternoon, the rhythm of the floor felt different. Staff moved more carefully. Conversations happened just outside the room instead of inside it. My chart stayed on a separate clipboard, not folded into the others. Then someone new walked in. She introduced herself as part of patient services. Her tone was neutral, practiced, and careful. She didn't ask me to explain anything. She didn't ask why I hadn't spoken up sooner. She didn't look at my sister at all. She asked for the chart. She read it quietly, slowly, page by page. When she reached the proxy documentation, she stopped. Not dramatically, just long enough to reread the same section twice. She asked a single question. "Can you confirm when this authorization was signed?" My sister answered immediately, too quickly. She named a date. The woman nodded, then compared it with another page. There was no argument, just silence. She asked another question, this time to the nurse who had been on shift earlier that morning. The nurse hesitated before responding, then said she would need to check the system. That was the moment the balance changed. The woman thanked her and stepped into the hallway. A few minutes later, she returned with someone else, a senior nurse I hadn't seen before. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't accuse anyone. They spoke in policy language. They pointed out that the authorization did not include patient acknowledgement, that the timestamp didn't align with my admission record, that certain consent requirements had not been met. Each sentence landed quietly but precisely. My sister tried to speak over them once, just once. The senior nurse stopped her with a calm hand gesture and said, "We'll continue in order." No one had ever stopped her before. They asked me if I was aware of the decisions being made on my behalf. They asked me directly, in front of everyone. I answered honestly, briefly. No emotion, no explanation. The woman from patient services nodded and made another note. At that point, all pending orders were paused. Not canceled, paused. That distinction mattered. The room felt suddenly still, not tense, structured. My sister's confidence didn't disappear all at once. It fractured. Her voice softened, her posture shifted. She stopped giving instructions and started asking questions. The staff responded politely, but no longer deferred. The senior nurse explained that until the proxy documentation could be verified and corrected, all medical decisions would require direct patient confirmation. She said it as if it were a routine, as if this happened every day, as if control had never been taken from me at all. The woman from patient services asked if I would like to speak with a patient advocate to review my options. She didn't imply urgency. She didn't suggest distress. She treated me like someone capable of deciding. I said yes. They scheduled the review. They documented the pause. They noted the discrepancy. No one argued. No one raised their voice. My sister stood quietly near the window, no longer at the center of the room. As the staff prepared to leave, the senior nurse looked at me and said, "We'll make sure everything moves forward correctly from here." Correctly. After they left, the room felt different. Not victorious, just balanced. For the first time since I'd been admitted, nothing was being done for me or around me. It was being done with me, and the record reflected that. The room felt different once the door closed behind them. Not lighter, not dramatic, just settled. The machines beside my bed continued their steady rhythm, unchanged. The blinds were still half open. The hallway outside sounded the same as it always had. But something fundamental had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. The senior nurse returned first. She stood near the foot of the bed, posture formal but no longer distant. Her voice was calm, precise, the way it had been during the review. Only now it was directed at me. "We've updated the chart," she said. "Medical decision authority has been restored to the patient." She didn't look toward the visitor's chair when she said it. The patient advocate followed, holding a thin folder against her chest. She confirmed the changes without ceremony. Proxy access had been revoked. Consent requirements were reset. Any future decisions would require direct acknowledgement from me, documented in real time. No apology was offered. None was needed. The system wasn't emotional. It didn't punish, it corrected. My sister stood near the window, arms folded tightly, her eyes fixed on the parking structure across the street. She hadn't spoken since the review concluded. The confidence she had carried for days, maybe longer, had dissolved into something smaller, quieter. She wasn't angry. She was out of options. A nurse approached with a clipboard and stopped at my bedside. This time, she waited. She explained each line slowly, clearly, and didn't move on until I nodded. When she asked a question, she asked me. The difference was subtle, but it was absolute. Later that afternoon, the attending physician came in to discuss the next steps. He pulled a chair closer to the bed instead of standing over it. He reviewed treatment options without rushing, outlining risks and alternatives in neutral language. When he asked for consent, he waited. I noticed something then. No one interrupted. No one translated my condition into something smaller. No one reassured me that this was being handled. The air in the room felt balanced, as if the hierarchy had finally aligned with reality. The conversation ended cleanly. When the doctor left, my sister turned toward me for the first time. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever she had expected, an argument, an explanation, even relief, none of it found a place to land. I didn't look away. I didn't explain myself. There was nothing left to justify. She left shortly after, her steps measured, her movements careful, as though the floor beneath her had become unfamiliar. The door clicked softly behind her. No scene, no final words, just distance. That evening, a nurse returned to adjust the IV. She checked my wristband, then the chart, then looked at me with a brief professional smile. "Everything is in order," she said. And for the first time since I had been admitted, it was true. Over the next few days, the routine continued without interference. Staff followed protocol. Documentation remained exact. Each decision, small or large, was routed through me. The hospital didn't need reminders. Once the correction was made, it held. That was the quiet power of procedure. I spent a lot of time thinking about how close it had come to going the other way. Not because of malice, not because of chaos, but because compliance is easier than verification. The system worked exactly as it was designed to do until someone asked the right question, until someone noticed a name. When I was finally cleared for discharge, the paperwork arrived neatly organized. The patient advocate stopped by one last time, confirming that all records reflected the updated authority and that no external access remained. "If you need anything further," she said, "you know how to reach us." I did. That knowledge alone felt like insurance. As I was wheeled toward the exit, I passed the same corridor where everything had first paused. The same neutral lighting, the same low hum of hospital movement. Nothing dramatic marked the moment. No one knew what had been corrected, and that was the point. Outside, the air felt colder than I remembered, clearer. I took a slow breath and let it settle. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded control. I hadn't needed to. The record had done that for me. Silence hadn't been weakness. It had been preparation. And when the system finally looked closely enough, it told the truth on its own. I didn't have to explain myself. The record already did.